Okay, I've got the next three problems that I'd like you to try out. Before you do that, I just want to point out that 4 and 5 look very similar. They've got all the same numbers and letters, but the signs are slightly different. So we should not get the same answers for those. So go ahead and try out 4, 5, and 6. Pause the video until you finish those up, and then once you're done, start it back up and we'll go over them real quickly. Okay, so you should have tried 4, 5, and 6 by now. Now let's look at each of these real quick. So on number 4, I went ahead and wrote out the factors of 6. We have 1 and 6, 2 and 3, because we want to multiply two numbers to get 6 and add to get -5. I already have two negative signs written down there. How did I get those? I looked at that second sign, that's a plus, which means they're going to be the same. Then I went back and looked at that minus sign, and that means they're both going to be negative. So now I just need to plug in 2 and 3 or 1 and 6 and see which one works out. Now if we think of this logically, we can kind of think our way through it. If I have a -2 and a -3, will that make -5? Or will -1 and -6 make 5? Well, it is going to be the -2 and the -3 that make 5. And if you're not really sure, then let's go and multiply it back out. We have the x times x is x squared. We have x times -3 is -3x. -2 times x is -2x, making -5x. And -2 times -3 gives us +6. Is that what we started with? Yes, it is. So our answer is x minus 2 times x minus 3. And if you wrote it down in the opposite order, x minus 3, x minus 2, that's just fine. So that is number 4. Number 5, it looks very similar, but it's going to be a different answer because of this negative sign. So we start with a negative sign here. We know that means they're going to be different signs, so then we look back to tell us which of the bigger numbers where the bigger number should go. Well, that negative sign tells us that the bigger number should be negative. That'll be our bigger number. So usually I start with the 2 and the 3. If I start with the 2 and the 3, I put the bigger number there and the smaller one there. Then when I multiply out, I have 2x and -3x. But when I combine those, I get a -1x, and that's not what we want. So we need to try the other set of factors, which is 1 and 6. Again, we put the bigger number here, smaller number. So we have 1x and a -6x. Well, 1x minus 6x gives us -5x, which is what we want. So even though these look very similar, this one sign difference here makes a huge difference because we end up with x plus 1, x minus 6. And again, we can multiply that out and see that x times x gives us x squared. We know the middle will get -5x, and 1 times 6 gives us -6. Now on number 6, you may be a little frustrated or confused, and you may be thinking, with these factors 1 and 1, there is no way we can ever get 3x. And you're right. So if you didn't come up with an answer with this one, you're actually right. This one's a tricky one. So let's look at why we can't have an answer and what that means. So if I try, the only factors are 1 and 1. If I try those and I multiply them out, I get 1x and 1x. Well, 1x plus 1x gives me 2x, which will never equal that 3x. And there are no other factors to try. I have tried all of my options. There is nothing else to try. So when that's the case, when there is no way to factor it, we call it prime. So if it is prime, that means it will not factor. So sometimes that will be the case, but I want to warn you with saying they're prime. After you try one pair, if there are multiple, don't just give up and say, well, the first one didn't work, so it's prime, because that's not always right. In this case, we had to try 2 of them, and then we found an answer. So you can only call it prime once you have exhausted all of your resources. Once you have tried every single pair, every single combination. If none of them work, then you can call it prime. So don't call it prime too early, or else you may end up getting it wrong. Let's look at a few more of these, and then you'll have a few more questions to answer, and we will be finished. Thank you for hanging with me. So number 7, we have 2x squared minus 10x minus 48. So you should notice in this one it looks a little different because there's a number in front of the x squared. that means there's probably a GCF here. So if I divide all of these numbers by 2, that's the number that I can take out of all of them. So my first step is taking out the GCF, and then I write it out. I have 2x squared divided by 2 just gives me x squared, negative 10x divided by 2 gives me negative 5x, and negative 48 divided by 2 gives me negative 24. So I went ahead and wrote out the factors of 24, just putting them right over here. Before we start trying them, we need to look at our signs. So we have a negative sign second, which means we're going to have different signs, and then the first sign is negative. So that means our bigger number, the bigger number is going to be here. So now we need to try out some numbers. We have 4 and 6. Usually I start at the bottom, so that's what I'm going to start with. I'll just go ahead and rewrite it here because I wrote that. So I have x plus 4x minus 6. We've got to put the bigger number there, and now we need to see if it works. So 4 times x gives me 4x. X times negative 6 gives me negative 6x, and that gives me a negative 2x. But that is not what I want. I want a negative 5x. So that means the 4 and the 6 don't work. We need to go back and try something else. So now I'm going to try the 3 and the 8. We need to put the bigger number with the negative sign. So then I have 3 times x is 3x, and negative 8 times x is negative 8x. And now I can add these up, and that gives me a negative 5x, and that is what I want. I want the negative 5x. So that means I know that the 3 and the 8 are correct. So I have 2 times x plus 3 times x minus 8. And then, of course, it's good for us to multiply them out to make sure we get what we want. So we have 2, let's see, we're running out of room here. I'll write it down here. 2 times x gives me x squared. Then I know in the middle I'll have a negative 5x, and the end, negative 8 times 3 gives me a negative 24. Then if I distribute that 2, I get 2x squared minus 10x minus 48, which is what I started with. So we know that that is correct. We're going to do just one more together and then talk about things to remember, and I'll let you answer the last few questions. I know these videos have been long, so thank you for hanging with me. So the first thing we need to think about is always GCF. Is there something I can factor out of all of these? And hopefully you can see that yes, there is. I can factor a 4 out of all of these. Now, if you can't just see it, that's okay. You can write down all the factors of each of these terms and then figure out what they have in common. So that means I put my 4 on the outside, I divide them each out, and I get x squared minus 3x minus 10. Now I need to make my 2 sets of parentheses. Remember, we bring that GCF down, and we need our signs and our factors. So first, our signs. We have a negative sign here. A negative sign second means that we have different signs, one positive, one negative, and then we have a negative sign first. So that means that this first one, this negative, is going to be our bigger number. We should put our bigger factor of the 2 that we use there. Now let's talk about our factors of 10. So to get 10, I can multiply 1 and 10, and I can multiply 2 and 5, but that's it. So usually I start with the smallest 2 of the factors, 2 and 5. I know that I need to put my bigger number here, so I've got to put my 5 with that negative, and then I can put my 2 there, and I'll multiply them out and see if they work. So this gives me a 2x. 5 times negative 5 gives me a negative 5x. Then I add those up, and I have a negative 3x. Is that what I want? Yes, it is. I wanted a negative 3x. So I know that those will work. So then I have 4 times x plus 2 times x minus 5. I think that's my answer. Let's multiply it out real quick. So we have 4 times x gives me x squared. We know the middle is going to give us negative 3x. In the end, we have 2 times negative 5, which is negative 10. Now if I multiply this 4 to all of these, I will get 4x squared minus 12x minus 40. So that means I am correct. So that is our answer. Real quick, 2 things to remember, that there's only one answer that will be factored completely. So this is our answer here. This is the only answer that is factored completely. We don't have multiple, just this. Second thing to remember is that I can mix up these two parentheses. It doesn't matter which order I write them in. If I put x minus 5 and then x plus 2, that's okay, as long as we put the GCF first. So the order of the factors except the GCF doesn't matter. Alright, so go ahead and answer the last few questions, and then don't forget to press submit.